Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the 190th hangout in a row of the Knowledge Bolide crew. It's amazing that close to 4 years ago we started this journey, and in the last few months we've kind of taken a little transition or a little change or added a great feature to our channel, and that is conversations with. Fill in the blank. If it's a conversation with a hunter or a conversation with a scientist. And today we are super, super happy to have someone that honestly I've never interacted with, but we know each other. I know she knows me. I know her. I know we all know the same people, but we've never really interacted before. So Dr. Melinda Hutson is here today, and I am super happy to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you.
So many people, I have a few intro slides. We're going to get to know you a little bit. So you let me brag about you for a second. Most of us are fans of you because of your work with the Cascadia Meteorite Laboratory. So as a curator there, we're going to talk about your responsibilities, how Cascadia came into existence, who are the key players involved, and what is the future, even including the foundation. So I hope you have comments on all those questions to come up. Some of the things that Melinda Hutson, may I call you Melinda or Dr. Hutson? What do you prefer?
I'm not formal. Melinda works.
All right. Dr. Meteorite, I'm also told works. So thank you very much for the pleasantry. Melinda got a Bachelor of Science in geophysics in the University of Minnesota, and she also did a PhD at the Planetary Sciences at the University of Arizona, my home state. So I got to call that one out. Some other early academic research positions that she had are listed on the screen now. I love the fact that she's done some work with the NASA Planetary Geology as an undergraduate research and a fellow. We're going to discuss a little. We even have a video we're going to tack on the end of this, where you talk about the NASA grants and getting funding. So yeah, it's going to be a pretty good conversation. So we're going to get into some of the processes that occurred in the solar system and meteorite classification and curation. And that's really the main point and the main thrust of the work done that I believe at Cascadia Meteorite Lab. So these are some of the key roles that you've held over the years, including some linkage with Portland State University. I'd love for you to discuss that later. I hinted about the NASA grants. You've done a lot of research paper, abstracts, books, studies. You've been cited a lot. So I'm not going to get into all the deep science of it. Oh, wow. See, there's more and more slides, just so much recognition and so many wonderful things. So I'm going to leave that on screen for a moment. In addition to all the academic classroom work, you also give back and do educational outreach. And so here we see you in front of some of the younger future scientists of tomorrow. And that's something I'm very passionate about as well. I love doing that. So Melinda, Dr.
Meteorite. Yes, that's what they called me.
Yeah. So this is one of the last slides I think I have about you. Just to introduce you a little bit further, this is an award you won at the. Maybe you can tell me a little bit about it because I don't think I understand what the actual award is.
The Sigma Xi, the local chapter, gives out awards for people who do research, but also people who support research. And as a curator, I actually do both, but this was for the support in research.
Awesome. Well, I want to get a little bit into I have two slides about who we are. I'm the crew leader of the Knowledge Bolide, meteorite dealer, but mainly an educator and community builder. My claim to fame, what I absolutely am dedicated to, and you've probably seen some of the work, is my meteorite education channel on YouTube. So we're approaching 1.7 million views, which is just crazy when you think about it. So there is a lot of interest in there out there for meteorites and science. but I like to start with a little bit of personal information about you. I always ask this of every guest. So tell us a little bit of something about Melinda. Is she a sports fanatic, a pet owner, an avid walker? What's your favorite movie? Are you into contact football?
Not sports. Um, I have a cat. And I am a bookaholic. I read a lot of science fiction, fantasy, and nonfiction. I am a big nonfiction reader.
Hmm.
And so that's probably how I wound up where I am today. As a child, I liked to read, fairy stories that went into, kiddie science fiction books, like juvenile Heinlein books and stuff. And so I was interested in space. Um, and I didn't know how to get into a career in space because I was told in high school that I was very bright and I could be a secretary. So I had 2 years of
Jeez.
typing and half a year of business machines. We won't go there.
Yeah.
Um, and so I was looking for a major when I started college at the University of Minnesota, and they had this newfangled theory of plate tectonics. It was new once, not that long ago. And it was fascinating because instead of doing geology by let's go study the rocks that are around us and let's go not connect them to anything, there was this big global planetary thing. The Earth was kind of alive with the plates moving and continents appearing, mountain ranges appearing and disappearing. And it was a completely different view of the Earth as a planet as opposed to a bunch of rocks on individual formations. And so that's how I wound up in geophysics, which wound up moving me forward through a whole bunch of other things to where I am today. So that's from being a bookaholic.
Nice. Do you find yourself ever in a watching a movie and just ripping it apart scientifically?
Sadly, yes, but if they're really bad, I can actually just say, okay, this has nothing to do. It's fiction. I can enjoy it. I actually enjoyed The Martian. I went with my husband, Alex Ruzicka, and we're sitting there, and the first thing that happens is there's a windstorm that blows everything over, and we're like, no, the atmosphere is not thick enough. And then at one point, the astronauts pulled out a map to go find something. And my husband, who is a map nerd, says, that's not the right map. Like, okay. So no, if it's close and not right, it's almost worse than if it's so wrong that who cares, you know?
Yeah,
So
that's
yeah.
awesome. Wow, I love that perspective. That was a great answer. I love it. Um, I'm glad you also see this, you're already ahead of me. This is a question that you've already answered, and you've already mentioned your husband Alex. So I'm just going to skip this one and go right to this question. And this is something that Sue and I we work together all day pretty much on meteorites. I mean, I have a day job, but work a lot on meteorites with my wife. I'm just curious, what are the pros and cons you have? Because you do work with your husband and have worked with him for a lot longer than I've worked with Sue.
Well, I'd say a pro is you don't wind up leading separate lives. I know people who are scientists who've married somebody who had no interest in science, and they each kind of wound up leading separate lives, which is not a good way to have a marriage. Um, the con, of course, is the work never ends. You're sitting there brushing your teeth to go to bed, and you're saying, oh, well, what do you think about this class and, this particular meteorite? I was looking at it. And so the work sort of pops up, in conversation and dinner and whatever. Um, it's interesting, but sometimes it would be nice to like stop working and, you know, go read a science fiction novel or something. Um, but yeah, there are an awful lot of things that we've done where it's not clear who did what. Ultimately, one of us, usually Alex, did the writing. Um, you can tell how much I contributed by how dense the writing is. The denser it is, the more it's Alex. The less dense, the more I contributed to it. So, but yeah, uh, it's worked well for us.
That's awesome. And you hit the nail on the head, I think, with the work never ends, and especially with meteorites, they're popping around the globe, so every time zone is available to us. So, is there any challenges of trying to juggle your family life and busy careers that never stop?
Uh, it would have been nice to have more time with the twins. We have twins.
Mhm.
When they were younger, they spent time in daycare because I took a year off, but I had to go back to work. And so there was that. There was I'm going to say something that is probably embarrassing, but my kids were fed breast milk for the first year.
Mhm.
And so I went to a Meteoritical Society meeting and we were shipping stuff back. And it was, it was like we couldn't get away from the kids that long without having coolers and trips to packaging. It was kind of a fun experience that's sarcasm. It was an unique experience.
Yes.
So yeah, there were some challenges, but
Mhm.
um, you know, my kids have zero interest in geology and space and meteorites.
Why is
They've heard
that?
mom and dad talking about it
Oh,
too much.
yeah.
Uh, both of them seem to be heading into biological sciences.
Hmm.
So they do have a science bend. They just didn't want to go where we were.
Yeah. I can see that happening. Yeah, I was tickled pink that my son wanted to join me on some of my rock shows, and then after he was with me for 2 days with nothing but meteorites, he was like, "I'm good."
Mhm,
I would like to introduce one of our crew members, Pat.
mhm,
Pat has also worked with someone you're familiar with, Daniel Shake,
mhm,
to co-classify a meteorite. He's the owner of Meteoritics Lab and been a member of the Meteoritical Society for well over a decade. So,
mhm.
Pat, let me see if I can get your camera turned on,
Hi,
man.
Melinda. It's great to see you.
Yep.
Um, I wanted to know a little more about the rich history of Cascadia Meteorite Labs, and there's a wonderful backstory in there with Dick and with ET. I'd just like to hear some more of that.
We're a little bit of an odd lab. A lot of meteorite labs start with somebody donating a large sum of money in a large meteorite collection, or both, one or the other. We didn't. Um, Alex and I graduated at a time when there was sort of a glut of people. Um, Several of our classmates were part of PSI in Arizona. I don't know what it is now, but back in 1996, it was a place that you could sit and put in grants, and the grants were what you got paid. It was what's called a soft money position, and we were offered a chance to be there, and we kind of wanted jobs. So Alex did a 3-year postdoc in Tennessee, and I applied for a couple of different positions. There weren't, I mean, he applied for like 20 or 25 things. There just weren't positions, and there were way too many people looking for them. And I got a job at Portland Community College in Portland with the intent that I would stay until we found something better, and we never did. Um, we created something better, is what happened. So I arrived in Portland, and somebody found out that there was a meteorite person here. So I'm teaching a class at night, and the president of the Rose City Astronomers pops in, and I don't know him from a hole in the wall, and he's friends with Dick. So Dick found out that there was a meteorite person here, and he had the local geology club invite me to give a talk. And Dick, who I did not know at all, came up and invited me out for beer. And I'm like, okay. Um, he didn't know that I was connected with Alex because we have different last names. And he had met Alex at an LPSC. And like a couple of years later, he went, what's Alex doing here? You're married? So it was funny. And one of the first years I was there, I had Patrick Thompson, Edwin's son, in my
Yes.
geology classes for a year. And
Ah,
he did not know, neither Edwin nor Patrick knew until Patrick was in my class that I was a meteorite nut. And then Patrick said, "You gotta meet my dad," and dragged me home to meet his father. So uh, Alex showed up 3 years later and um, basically got a desk where he could apply. He basically became an adjunct at Portland State University so that he could apply for grants, and he got 2 grants fairly early on. And so I started helping him out. They had a very old scanning electron microscope. It's since been replaced, and nobody could get any data on it except for me. I always seem to be able to have the magic touch with getting data off the thing. It did all sorts of weird things. The person in charge said they'd never seen any of these things happen before. They knew it was going to be interesting if I was on. So Dick and Edwin started coming over occasionally for dinner, and they would talk about how it was their dream to always they had this dream to have a meteorite lab in Portland. And one night I said, "Well, why don't we?" And it's like everybody blinked, and it's like, "We're a lab, okay?" And people said, "You can't just say you're a lab." I'm like, "Sure, I can say I'm a lab." We came up with a name, we came up with a logo. Um, we copped a squat in somebody else's lab for a couple of years. We had a broken down wooden cabinet. Edwin donated roughly two and a half dozen unclassified NWA chondrites that turned out not all to be chondrites. There's a story behind that.
cool.
Um, and that's how we got started. And we grew gradually. Dick put a small amount in a foundation account and went on the road stumping for funds. And people would donate material. And people would, give you type specimens for classification. And, you fast forward a couple of decades and we're at over 1,700 meteorites. So, yeah. So that's how we got started. It was pretty odd. Um, we've always had undergraduate students that wanted to work with the lab, and we've always trained them by classification. So really early on, we had a geology student at Portland State, Carla Farley, and she wanted to work in the lab. So I pulled 3 of the ones that Edwin gave me. They all looked like high type chondrites, which should be easy to classify. And 2 of them were, and 1 of them was not. And it is now a member of the new Tissamumonite group.
Woohoo!
At the time, it took a long time to figure out that we were going to call it a Winonaite, but it was an odd one, and we recognized it. It said it in the abstract and poster that Carla and Alex put together. And that poster, that abstract had all the data that was used in the recent Tissamumonite paper. And
Cool.
if you look, you'll see Farley, and that's Carla. So she was an
Cool.
undergraduate. So that's we got started and we kept growing.
That's an awesome backstory. Thank you, Melinda.
Now, I have to say here, this is not your brother. This is a brother, a religious
brother,
brother.
yes.
Okay. When this slide first came up, when I looked at it, I'm like, oh my God, let's get him.
It's sort of like brother Guy Consolmagno.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
He's not my brother either.
Um, these are my understanding of the goals of Cascadia Meteorite Laboratory. Do you think that these are accurately representative of what you guys are working day in and day out to build up there?
Yes. We are interested in research, not only, by Alex and myself, but also spreading it around through graduate and undergraduate students. We're interested in formal education. Alex is teaching a meteorites class this term, and a lot of the people, the undergraduates that are taking it, are not necessarily, interested yet in meteorites, but we hope by the end they are. We've been going out and giving public talks and demonstrations at schools, museums, libraries, whatever, for years. Dick was our biggest outreach person. He'd been a high school teacher, Dick Pugh, and he put thousands of miles on his truck going all over the Pacific Northwest, talking to school groups, library groups. If there was a venue, he'd hit it. I mean, he really was passionate about it. And so, yeah, we want the public to be aware of meteorites, myths and misconceptions, as well as reality. And of course, as a curator, I'm interested in maintaining and increasing our meteorite collection.
Yeah, yeah. Greedy.
Oh, as I told somebody today, I don't have my own meteorite collection. I'm not a collector. However, I'm very acquisitive when it comes to the lab's collection,
Yes.
because I want to have material for research, education research. We'll never finish classifying all the stuff we've got. Dick left us a lot of unclassified meteorites. He loved to buy whole stones at Tucson. He went shopping every year, and I think we have over 500 unclassified meteorites.
Let me add them. Well, I did want to button up your thought by saying yes. Your dedication to education and outreach are very apparent. You're here with us doing this today, and we're very appreciative of it. We had Roberto Vargas, a name who may be familiar to you. He's done a lot of 10 mentions are in the MEPO, at least right now. He is the president of the IMCA, a meteorite hunter and a meteorite dealer, and a great friend of mine. We just missed each other in the quartzite strewn field. I left on Sunday night and he arrived Sunday or Monday morning. So but so he's not able to ask this question today, but oh great, you want me to say that?
I have no idea how you pronounce it.
Okay, you wrote an article about the TR meteorite for the Meteorite Times back in 2015. Could you tell us a little bit about that story?
This came through Dick Pugh. Somehow somebody got a hold of Dick. He was constantly fielding, I think I've got a meteorite things. And he called me on the phone and said, I'm at a restaurant, in, Vancouver, Washington. Can you drive up and join me? And I drove up, and there was this woman, and she had 2 meteorites, slightly rusty, and her English was not very good. She had a family member who was helping to translate, and every time we spoke with her, the story changed. So the story that I gave was the best story that we got out of it. When you're trying to classify something, you need some kind of documentation. Everybody said, this was an observed fall. They talked about it and how they heard a noise and thought it was an incoming missile or something, and were crouching down and saw dirt spray up into the from the rice paddy they were working on. And they were able to pull out this article that was in probably Cambodian, and I was, running pieces through Google Translate to figure out what it was saying. And the woman said it fell on July 4th, and I'm like, well, that's kind of an odd date, because of course it's Independence Day here. And so I found the date in the article, and sure enough, it translates to July 4th. So I was able to verify enough of it, and I got somebody at the university to translate most of the article, that it went through the classification. And so I don't remember how I got asked to write the article for, I think it was for Meteorite Times, but I wrote up what I knew at the time as best I could. So apparently it is actually quite rusty. It's rusty because they were pouring water on it to drink as part of, like, I don't know, a religious ceremony or something. So it's an H chondrite. It had lots of water poured on it, so the metal's rusted.
Wow.
And that's Dick's rock hammer in the pictures. He took pictures of all of these.
Wow. It's amazing when you thank you for that story. It's amazing when you think about these meteorites as anything but scientifically or beautiful value, as medicinal or cultural or historic antiquities.
Hmm.
I guess I'm asking the next question too. So so let's see what it is. Oh yeah, this is my question. I'm interested in it. Really? You've done a lot of research on different meteorites, including different classes. So enstites, angrites, Martians. Every scientist that I have talked to has had their ones that just drive them. That's their go-to. They love it. They are intrigued by it. They're doing their research on it. What is your go-to meteorite of interest?
I'm going to break your trend. I don't have one. It's sort of what interests me now, which kind of depends on what we've got funding for, what has come in that's weird and interesting. Um, I like a whole bunch of different types of meteorites. Uh, right now, I'm suddenly, for some reason, have a glut of very odd HEDs. So I'm spending time in HED land trying to figure out what the heck is going on. One of our grad students, Vince, who is here tonight, decided to, for a lark, work on it has nothing to do with his thesis, an interesting class in a meteorite. It turned out to be odder, not otter, odder than expected. And so I've actually been spending the last week on that particular thing. When we were doing silicate inclusions and iron meteorites, they were fascinating. We spent a lot of time on it. We did a lot of discussion on it. Um, the grant ended, the papers got written. I haven't revisited it since, but at the time, those were the most fascinating things I was working on. So I don't have a go-to meteorite.
I would have. That is a fantastic answer. I'm really enjoying. You're very conversational. I love it. A lot of the doctors that were able to interview are very down to earth, and it's really inviting, and it really helps us get the information out. So I really appreciate it. Our next question is by not only a knowledgeable crew member, but my beautiful wife. Sue, take it away, please.
Hi, Melinda. Nice to meet you finally.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being here. As Topher said, I'm co-owner of his company, and I do like lots of meteorite jewelry and things like that. But so I don't read a lot of scientific papers. I'm probably the newest meteorite enthusiast in the group, but I do love meteorites now. And I was looking through all of the things that you've contributed to, and the one that jumped out at me was Angrites and Mercury. And I was wondering if you could talk to us about that just a little bit.
So there was a paper quite some time ago that suggested that it's not probable, but it's possible that we could have a couple of Mercurian meteorites. They have to sort of flow the wrong way in a gravity well, but it could be done. You know, if it's knocked off the right way, it can wind up in an elliptical orbit that would bring it out to the Earth. So there was after the paper, there was a big push. Everybody's sort of the holy grail was, can we find the piece of Mercury? It came out that Tony Irving classified a meteorite, and he knows a great deal about meteorites. He's really excellent in meteorites, but at the time he didn't know that much about Mercury. And so he suggested that Angrites, a particular meteorite, was from Mercury, and I understood where he came from with his arguments, but they weren't quite correct. And so I wound up on the no, they're not for Mercury side unintentionally. It comes down to a girlfriend of mine in college at the University of Arizona, Anne Sprague. She's actually written a book about Mercury. She was doing a lot of work on Mercury using the telescopes. It was telescope observation. It was before any of the spacecraft. And the two of us would get together and exercise and talk about what we were doing. And so we cross-pollinated with what would you expect for a meteorite from Mercury. So well before anybody else was thinking about it, I was, because we were discussing, well, this is what the spectra suggests about Mercury, and this is what you should look for. And enstatite achondrites or obrites are probably closer to being what a piece of Mercury would look like than an angrite. It should be fairly iron poor. If you look at Mercury, it's heavily cratered, but it's actually not as heavily cratered as the heavily cratered part of the moon. It's more cratered than the Maria, but it's not as heavily cratered as the Highlands. So anything that you got off should not be 4.5 billion years old, which the Angrites are. So I would say Angrites and Mercury don't belong in the same sentence. I'd still like to find a piece of genuine, we can prove it, Mercury, and I have no idea what the oxygen isotopes would look like, because we don't have any samples of Venus or Mercury, and the sun's oxygen isotopes are different than terrestrial. So, you'd expect to find something, and if we ever do a sample mission to Mercury, we'll know how to look for Mercury and meteorite.
Thank you. That was very interesting. I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's super fascinating that you already knew what to expect or what to look for, and we're looking for those traits, because I'll be honest with you, I'd love to have a Mercurian meteorite myself. We have Carl joining us from New York.
Hi, Melinda. Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Just a brief thing about myself. I've been a meteorite collector for several decades now and do a lot of outreach and volunteer work when it comes to showing off meteorites to the public, like school groups and at planetariums and things like that. I've amassed over 811 different named meteorites so far, mostly historics and a lot of witness falls. Is there anything that you would care to share with us regarding your experiences as a woman in science? For instance, what differences have you ever observed in your interactions with colleagues versus those same colleagues' interactions with men?
So I would say that with the current generation of scientists, I don't see much of a difference. Early on, I'm old enough that I remember some differences. I did my master's with Robert Dodd, who wrote a book about meteorites a long time ago.
Oh, yeah.
I was his last graduate student.
Mm.
I was John Lewis's last graduate student at the
Ah.
University of Arizona. I'm not sure if I just do them in or what, but Alex and I were both Dodd's students. Dodd asked me to do shock classification of over 100 H chondrites using his shocks classification scheme. It predated Stoeffler's. And so I will say that that was good training for classifying meteorites, because seeing a lot of them lets you know when something is weird. But so my work wound up in a paper. There was a Lunar and Planetary Science Conference. I went, Alex went, Dodd went, and the author of the paper that my data wound up with went. The author of that paper gave a presentation. At one point, the slide had women in bikinis on it. It's like, what does that have to do with meteorites? When we were all done, Dodd came up and he hit Alex on the shoulder, good job. Hit me on the fanny.
Oh boy.
Wasn't a grope. It was a,
Yeah.
hi, you're my daughter. Good job. Okay.
Attaboy.
Yeah.
Times have changed.
Times have changed. Many years ago, there was a Meteoritical Society meeting in Munster that Alex and I went. And, you know, he registered as Dr. Ruzicka and I registered as Dr. Hutson. And after I got there and they realized we were married, I became Frau Ruzicka, which was kind of weird. So, yeah, the older generation, it was, you know, you had to be a little bit aggressive and abrasive to survive. So I suspect that most of the women scientists my age can hold our own in any kind of thing. If you were sensitive, you washed out. My aunt was a professor of bacteriology way back in the 1930s, and she was
Wow.
extremely aggressive, trust me. Yeah, but times have changed. I will say, you know, the last 5-10 years, I'm not seeing that sort of bias the way I used to.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. Thanks for answering my question.
Oh, it looks like Topher has another question. Oh, this is it. This is the question you've been waiting for. You and I
Yes.
probably get pounded so much alike for messages of I have a meteorite. I found the 38-pound lunar in my backyard. It's kind of the bane of at least my existence. It may be a very frustrating part of your life. Can you tell me, how do you deal with it? What do you communicate with people? How do you stay positive and not just go bananas on every 12,000th person?
I try not to. I've occasionally whined on Facebook, not very often, but there have been one or two cases where it's just like, I can't believe this person. Um, Actually, I will say that I probably get about 8 to 12 emails a day. And most of the people are quite nice. Several of them will follow up after I tell them, no, you don't have a meteorite, with thank you for replying. You were the only one that answered me. There are the persistent pest people, the ones that you say, no, it's not a meteorite and I won't analyze it. And they come back and send you pictures and send you data that they got at some other lab somewhere. And it's sort of like, well, why are you doing this? Because you want some sort of affirmation that, yes, you have a meteorite. I'm not going to be the one to affirm it. There are one or two that are scary. And I mean, literally out of 20 years, there's been a couple that were scary. There's one that I have like, close to 200 emails that were sent to Alan Rubin, Karen Ziegler. I mean, it's got a cast of thousands. That particular person seems to have a personal bias against Randy Korotev. But he's hit Dave Kring, Alan Rubin, everybody. And you
The
know,
gang's all here.
the gang's all there, and I don't even look at them. I see the guy's name and add him to the list of emails to keep in case he ever shows up, you know, in the lab and has to be escorted by the public safety or the police. So there's a couple of scary ones, but most people have been quite nice. And every once in a while, somebody actually has a meteorite.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, like, you've been doing it for decades. You've been inquired thousands of times. What is the percentage of people who actually have a good candidate of a meteorite and then actually have a meteorite?
So out of the last 20 years, I'm thinking maybe 5 people have had meteorites, on the order of 5. There was one poor woman, she showed up at a talk at the Rice Museum that Dick was giving. Her family had a farm in Kansas, and there was a story about a meteorite falling, and she had 3 different meteorites. She was in an area where a whole bunch of meteorites had been collected. There were obviously overlapping falls. And she let us cut 2 pieces of them, and we classified them eventually. And she was happy to know that, yes, they were in fact meteorites. Whether they actually fell, I don't think so, because they were different weathering grades and stuff. One of them might have, I don't know. But, you know, she had real meteorites, 3 of them.
Hmm.
So, And then, of course, there was the woman from Cambodia who showed up with, watched this thing fall. You know, when somebody says, I saw it fall, the first thing you think is, no, you didn't. But nope, this
Yeah.
one did and had real meteorites. So
Mhm.
my favorite one is Bogiari from Kenya.
Mhm.
So I get this email from a guy in Kenya. Dear madam, I have found thousands of kilos of meteorites in Kenya. And the picture that they sent didn't look like anything. And I'm like, uh-huh. And you'd like to sell me the Brooklyn Bridge. But I was nice and replied back. And the guy sent picture after picture after picture. I could tell after he cleaned one up that it was in fact a meteorite. Of meteorites on scales, I confirmed 110 kilograms.
It's
So
amazing.
that was the minimum of what he had. He sent a really nice piece, 160 grams, and it was an interesting meteorite to classify. It's still on my list of things to get back to because it has some very weird shock melt in it. And afterwards, he thanked me and said, what would you like? And I said, oh, I could use another piece because I can always use another piece. And
Mhm.
he sent me a 2 kilo whole stone. So, and then he sent my name to everybody in Africa. And for the next 2 years, I was getting emails from all over Africa. And one of them turned out to be somebody who had purchased a bunch of meteorites and had what he thought was a ringer, and it turned out to be the first lunar I did.
Wow.
So, um, you know,
You got to
it,
be open to it then, you know?
I will tell you that when most people send something, I have sort of a canned message that says, your meteorite doesn't look like, your sample doesn't look like a meteorite to me from the images. I'm sorry, but we're not accepting material for for analysis. And please go to one of these Facebook sites. So you can blame me for adding a whole bunch of people to some of the meteorite IT Facebook sites.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so, what can
Yeah,
I
in
say?
the last 6 years, one person has contacted me that actually found a meteorite. It was an iron meteorite, and when they went in for classification to Dr. Hurd, it
Mm-hmm.
was absolutely confirmed that it was a Campo di Cello.
Mm.
He found it at a garage sale. He forgot to mention that.
um, I can do better.
Go
I
for it.
I got an email from a guy out in Bend in Eastern Oregon who had found a strewn field and had lots of meteorites. And he had a photo of something that, looked like it could be a chondrite. So I said, sure, I'd look at it. He sent me a box with, I don't know, 20 meteorite samples. Was a sliced etch iron. There were chondrites of different types. Some still had the desert sand from the Sahara in them. But I packaged them back up, sent them back, and said, "Thank you. I'm sorry, but I'm unable to work on your strewn field," and just left it at that. So, there are people who will try to game the system.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, I appreciate that we have that pain together. But one thing that's not painful, absolutely gorgeous and lovely, chondrules. So we're going to change and end the conversation to the topic of chondrules, and I think Dave Pinsky is going to have a question for us. All right, our question from Dave Pinsky is not available from Dave Pinsky today. He's a docent at the Griffith Observatory, and he does a lot of outreach there. They're back to school, and winter breaks is always extremely busy time, so he wasn't able to join us today, but he asked if you could share, and I know this is a 3-hour answer, but could you share your theories of origins of chondrule formation with us?
There's probably more than one way to make a chondrule. You melted something. It was in space. It's round. Then it came together with a bunch of other round things and made a chondrite. Um, really, uh, chondrules are complicated. I think we're going to need to get a lot more data on exoplanetary systems that are undergoing star formation with dusty disks. I remember when I was a grad student with Bob Dodd, he was like, you've got a millimeter sized grain of olivine in this particular object. You're starting with micron sized dust. How do you do this? Because the dust particles aren't that close together in a nebula. So our models for forming chondrules aren't quite there yet. You need to have ways of bringing material together, and you might be forming some of them as shock melts blown off of an already existing parent body. You might be making some from, clumps like calcium aluminum rich inclusions or agglomeratic olivine objects. I call them dust bunnies. But again, with a dust bunny, you have to concentrate enough dust to make a dust
Yeah.
bunny.
Yeah.
And there's lots of different proposed mechanisms. And I'm not an astrophysicist, so I'm not necessarily the best person to evaluate nebular mechanisms for concentrating solid materials. What I can say is they're little things that were clearly molten. So something melted them, and there's several different ideas for how you melt them. Shock waves, big lightning bolts, impacts, lots of different mechanisms. Maybe that there's more than one mechanism. You melt it, it cools quickly, and it sticks together. Um, I do like Metzler's idea that a lot of these form as clusters and that you lose the cluster texture through, processing after you formed the chondrite. So, in fact, Alex, who isn't here yet, he was thinking about maybe trying to join it towards the end, um, has just submitted a paper on exactly that, where he's supporting Metzler's ideas on cluster chondrites. And I don't want to go any further than that because it's his paper. But I've been talking with him about it and reading it, and never mind. So the short answer is there isn't a good answer for this question.
We asked that same question to Dr. Grossman and Dr. Rubin, and you did it 45 minutes quicker than both of them. So congrats. Oh, good. We have Marissa, and she is here. So Marissa's going to ask her question. Give me 1 second, and I'll get you set up.
Didn't Dr. Rubin quote somebody that said the easiest way to make friends or enemies in meteorites is to share your chondrule formation theory?
Yeah.
That's probably a true statement. I'm not going there.
I love how ambiguous you are about how nebulous you were about it.
Yes.
I am really pleased to introduce Marissa. Marissa is a crew member, a very well-respected crew member. She's actually the secretary of the IMCA, and she does terrific artwork related to her thin section photography, and it's amazing. So Marissa, over to you with your question, please.
Hey, thank you, Topher, and thank you, Melinda, for being here. So my question is, what advice do you have for people who want to pursue a career in meteoritics?
Get a college degree in some related field like chemistry or physics or geology. Depends on what you want to do. If you're doing nebular modeling, you might be more interested in chemistry than geology. If you're going to do petrography of meteorites, you would want the same skills you would use in doing petrography of earth rocks. And it comes down to reading enough journal papers and looking at enough samples to start to get a feel for, where is something that's a little different, or what are some of the possibilities for making this. I know we ran into that with the silicate inclusions and iron meteorites. It's like we seem to be having little blobs that have migrated through cracks and in the metal, and as they migrated, they left crystals behind, so they changed composition, and it was in one particular meteorite. So we have like a sieve mechanism going on in this particular meteorite for these particular inclusions. That wasn't true for other inclusions, but so you can't think about possibilities if you haven't read something or talked to somebody to have those possibilities first pop into your mind. There's sort of a process. If you look at people who were looking at meteorites 100 years ago, they have broader generalities and they're not sure what they're looking at. And so you really do build on the work of the people who come before you. And it's difficult to just say, I'm going to self-educate. You can do that, and I've seen people successfully do that. But it helps if you have other people that are in the field that you're working with, that you're talking to, other researchers, other educators. It increases your knowledge base, and that's actually what you need to pursue a career in meteoritics, is enough of a knowledge base to do whatever you want to do.
Yeah, thank you so much. I know it gets a little confusing out there because now there's so much you can pursue with a degree.
You know what, I like to put this as an analogy. If you go back to people who were looking at meteorites in the 1800s and you compare them to today, it's like going back to looking at the general doctors in the 1800s versus we now have a neurosurgeon and a obstetrics and somebody who does knee replacements. People specialize now because as the knowledge base gets deeper and has more breadth, you can't cover the whole subject. So you cover your part of it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, well said. All right. Do you recognize this man?
Erwin F. Lange.
Nice. Okay. I just want to make sure you're not a fraud or a phony or could you please, I know this is one of you and Alex or Alex and your projects that you are very, very emotionally invested in and wanted to continue into the future. Could you please pontificate a little bit about the Erwin F. Lange Endowment?
So when we started the Meteorite Lab, which is about 20 years ago at this point, Dick decided to create an endowment fund through the Portland State Foundation, and he named it for his mentor, Erwin F. Lange. So Erwin F. Lange was a chemistry person, chemistry instructor, I guess professor at Portland College, I think it was called then. It wasn't Portland State University yet. And he was passionate about meteorites. He decided that 1968 would be the year of the meteorite in Oregon. He was Dick Pugh's master's advisor, and Dick worked in his lab, and he used some sort of pot of money to purchase a 40-pound Odessa, which is was the only meteorite the Portland State owned until we started the lab, and which is not meteorite number one, although it should be, because Dick had it at his house for safekeeping and didn't give it to us until we were up over number 100. So it's 100 and something. I forget what the number is. But he had a huge influence on Dick Pugh. And he set the model for Dick for public outreach, for scientific inquiry. Dick would not have gone anywhere near where he went without Erwin Lange. So he set he named the foundation account after Dr. Lange, and it started with, like, I forget whether it was $500 or $1,000. It was a small amount of money. And over the years, the idea that Dick had was that eventually it would pay for a curator for the lab. When I was first working, I was volunteering my time. There are no funds at Portland State for a curator. The endowment is now paying enough to cover about 3 hours a week. So that's what I'm covered. And trust me, I spend a lot more than 3 hours a week
Yeah.
being the curator. And so when Dick died, he left a substantial amount of money to the endowment, specifically for hoping to get a curator. And we talked to the people at Portland State, and we were promised that if we could raise the rest of the money, they would create an endowed curator position. We're only about a third of the way there. It might be another 60 years before we get there. But, that's what the foundation account is. It pays out a small amount of money each year. Before I let it pay me a salary, we would use that to, pay for me to get the cheapest airfare down to Tucson and stay in the cheapest hotel possible, where I would accompany Dick on his buying sprees at the Tucson Gem Show. Or if we needed to buy cabinets for the samples, it would come out of the endowment funds. So it was not a lot of money each year. It's still not a lot of money each year. It's more than it used to be, but like I said, a couple of years ago, we decided that we would start paying the curator so that, I don't have to worry about teaching classes at Portland State to keep my access cards and keys to the lab and all of that stuff. So I'm, now actually paid a salary to be the curator. It's not much, but it'll do.
I hope that expands into the future. And I have a slide later on with full contact information about how people can get connected with the foundation and make a donation or just learn more in general. This slide here has a picture of E.T. Edwin Thompson, and I just love this guy. I met him just like 6 years ago, but I will sit at his feet in Tucson and listen to any story he's got to tell, and he's got a lot of good ones.
Oh yes, and he and Dick were fairly close, and we all miss Dick. And Edwin's health has not been up to Tucson for a while, so
Yeah. I have a copy of his most recent book, and he autographed it for me, so I was really thankful for that. Let's see here. So yeah, here's information about how you can get in touch with the foundation, and you can make a donation, or you can just learn more, or you can spread it around to rich friends that you know. Continuing information of how to contact. That is the end of our prepared conversation. I don't think of these as interviews as much as a conversation. So I hope that felt comfortable and a conversation to you as well. We really honestly appreciate your time. Cannot believe of the caliber of guests we're having on this show. So thank you very much, Melinda. We are going to break off for any questions. So
Yes.
Sue's in charge of that.
Our first question is going to be from crew member Allison.